Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jimmy Richardson, and I am a public historian. I'm from Paterson, New Jersey, and I was born and raised there. And I have done extensive, extensive research on the presence of the African American community. And today I'm going to be talking about Dr. Martin Luther King, and he is close to my heart in many ways because of what he taught, as well as the fact I got a chance to see him up close and personal. Well, kind of up close. 8 days before his assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King would visit the city of Paterson. March 27th of 1968, he would come, but it was basically and I won't call it a tour, but I'm going to call it a tour. And he stopped in Newark, New Jersey first, and he stopped in Newark, and he stopped at Southside High School. And in one of the photographs outside, you will see a young Donald Payne sitting on the front seat in that photograph. From Southside High School, he went downtown to Bell Telephone. That's when it was they had the seven bells. And if you remember that, if you're old enough to remember that, you know what I'm talking about, the seven bells. And he would have lunch with a number of people, African American activists and people who were trying to change the city. And remember that the year before that they had the rise of '67. So he was really trying to heal some old wounds, and he wanted to really understand what was happening in New Jersey. And from there he would go to Jersey City, New Jersey, to the Cunningham AME Zion Church, and I believe it's Cunningham, but I know it's an AME Zion Church, where he would deliver a short message, and from that point they gave him a tour of Jersey City. And of course it was time for a break, and that evening he would come to Paterson. Basically it was twilight, and he would come to Paterson to between 1,800 and 2,000 people who were standing waiting for his arrival. And of course, I shouldn't say of course, but he was running late. And of course, with all the things that he was doing and had to do that day, he was running late. What is phenomenal about it for me is because I lived right across the street from the Community Baptist Church of Love. The name has since changed, and another congregation occupies the building now. It is called the Bethel AME Church. So Dr. King would come, and if you look at some of the photographs, and for those who are watching, you got to come to the library and see the exhibit, because the things that I'm talking about are on display as we speak. And as he sat in the pulpit, he just happened to sit underneath a picture of Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. Why that is so prophetic? Because 8 days later he would be assassinated. So you're looking at Jesus Christ and Martin Luther King, and that comparison of them together really has some biblical and historic significance as it relates to him and his life and his life's work. We shall overcome. Every revolution needs an anthem, and We Shall Overcome would be the African American anthem for the Civil Rights Movement. You can continue just low. Would be the anthem for the Civil Rights Movement for the African American community. And I shouldn't say just the African American community, because it was a song that really bound a lot of different cultures and communities. The Jewish community was most certainly very supportive of the Civil Rights Movement, and we all clasped hands together, and we marched and sang that song as a song of unity. And that's the part of the anthem part that really stems and pushes the Civil Rights Movement forward. Every revolution needs an anthem. After Dr. King left Paterson on April 1st, he would stop at the National Washington Cathedral. And for years, I have been saying that Dr. King's speech that he said in Patterson was the last speech that he said before he was assassinated, but it's not. His visit to the National Washington Cathedral was his last speech, and he talked about the Vietnam War and a lot of other things that he had been talking about throughout the country since the beginning. How Martin Luther King was born, Michael King, on January 15, 1929, 9 months before the stock market crash. He was born in January. The crash was in October. Now, with the stock market crash, his father went to Germany, and as he goes to, and again, both of their names are Michael. He goes to Germany, and he is so taken with the Protestant reformist Martin Luther. When he comes back to the United States, that's why he changes his name as well as Martin Luther King Jr. So that's how his name comes to be and why he was convicted by the work that Martin Luther did in Germany. And I've always talked about the prophetic photograph, the prophetic painting. It's a really interesting thing about that painting. After Dr. King came to Patterson in '68, Reverend Fred Lagarde, who was the pastor at that church, he had that painting recreated to be Afrocentric. So Jesus is now African American. Oh, no, not African American. Jesus is now black. Martin Luther King goes to a segregated grammar school. And after going to a segregated grammar school, he goes to Morehouse. After graduating, he goes to Morehouse and gets a BA. From Morehouse, he goes to Kosher Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. And for those who may not know, Dr. King has a long-standing history with New Jersey. He actually lived in New Jersey at 753 Walnut Street in Camden, New Jersey. And he lived there while he attended seminary. He eventually gets his master's degree in master's degree in divinity from Boston University. He goes back down south, and he occupies a position as pastor for the Dexter Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And as he becomes a pastor, and as he leading his congregation, what happens, the turn of events, and it's almost like an event horizon. The two people, when they come together, they actually make a new universe, and I'm talking about Rosa Parks. And let me just back up a little bit. The civil rights movement had almost stalled, and you can let's go to the list. The civil rights movement kind of halfway stalled, and it got stalled because there really wasn't a leader like Martin Luther King. What really the trigger that really starts and unites people, the African American community, is the 1952 Brown versus Board of Education. But the case that really makes it work is Briggs versus Elliott. Briggs versus Elliott is the first case in which Thurgood Marshall, he presided over all of them, but he is the one who really brings that case to an end. Now, the good part about it is that it was ended with an opinion from the Supreme Court that said, with all deliberate speed, they must desegregate the schools. The second trigger is when Emmett Till gets assassinated. When he gets assassinated, it unites as well as electrifies the whole country, because the whole country knew what was going on and what happened to Emmett Till. The third thing that unites and really brings things to, unites things and unites people is December 1st, 1955. Rosa Parks is riding on the bus, on a segregated bus, and she refused to move. And the bus driver, whose name was James Blake, was the bus driver, and he said, "You gotta move. You know where you belong," and she refused to move. The ironic story about James Blake and Rosa Parks, he forgot. He had thrown her off the bus once before. So after she was arrested and detain, who did they call? Martin Luther King. He comes to her defense, and in coming to her defense, they realized, and I must go back a little bit, Rosa Parks was not the first woman in Montgomery to be thrown off the bus. There was another young lady, but Rosa Parks was the perfect person to do it. A member of the church, she was also a member of the NAACP. She was a seamstress and an upstanding woman in the community. Everybody knew her to be, and her husband to be great and outstanding people. She was the great and the perfect model to do a demonstration. Now, Martin Luther King, in his studies, he really learned a lot about nonviolence because he studied Gandhi. And he probably studied a lot of other people too, but most certainly Gandhi's practices stood out in his mind much more. So he wanted to help Rosa Parks because the Montgomery Improvement Association brought him in. He ends up becoming the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, by which they rally around Rosa Parks and they boycott nonviolence. They boycott the bus company, and it was over a year that the bus company were denied. Well, I'm turning it around now. They were denied the presence of the African Americans to ride their bus. They were denied that, and in doing that, the bus company almost went bankrupt. Now, because of what they did and how they defended and how they rallied around the boycott, what happens is it went to the Supreme Court. And it was a Supreme Court decision that said that it said, oh gosh, the bus company had to desegregate the transportation. It's a transportation company. They had to desegregate. So in doing that, that's the beginning of Rosa Parks. That collision with those two people has really created a new world for us all. And I'm saying it for us all because we all have a tremendous respect for those two people, for what they did and how they continued to sacrifice their lives. 1957, Martin Luther King establishes the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, in which he was the president. At the time, at 57, when they first get started, they had 10 offices, I think 10 offices, 7 officials, and of course they had a staff of 4. And of course now, for those who may not know, the city of Patterson, or the African American community in the city of Patterson, had a SCLC office in Patterson. And I believe that that's another reason why Dr. King may have come in '68, because there was another connection, because he had an office there. So in addition to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he was really doing a lot of talking, a lot of rallying, and a lot of making, and I can't say making a name for himself. The kind of work he did made him popular. In 1957, Billy Graham was doing his crusades all around the world. He was the moral conscience for the white people of this country. And he really took notice to what Martin Luther King was doing, and he felt that if they could connect and work together, how big and how important it would be to be under the umbrella of Billy Graham's crusades. So he comes to Madison Square Garden in 1957, and he speaks at a rally, and I believe there were 30,000 people there, the largest audience he had ever spoke. And I think he does the benediction. He comes again at another time, and he speaks again, not at Madison Square Garden, but another arena. Now, 1958, Billy Graham invited, this is the second time, he invited Martin Luther King to come and offer the opening prayer. But he finds out, and it was in Los Angeles, he finds out that Governor Daniels, who was a segregationist, and Martin Luther King felt that he was the wrong person to introduce him. You're going to have a segregationist going to get up and introduce the moral conscience of the country, and Martin Luther King says, no, that can't happen. You got to change that. You got to get somebody else. I will not come. You got to, and he was very, very adamant about that. I can't come. I will not come. What you're doing is you're confusing everybody. You can't have a segregationist supporting what we're talking about in terms of desegregation. You can't have that. So that is part of the story and relationship with Billy Graham and Martin Luther King. And the unfortunate part about Billy Graham's crusade is that during the hardest parts of the civil rights movement, you got to ask yourself a question. Where was Billy? Where was he? Because he most certainly was not with us. 1958, again, I said that about Billy Graham. 1959, Martin Luther King comes to Harlem, and he's doing a rally in Harlem. And an African-American woman stabs him. She stabs him, and he is rushed to Harlem Hospital, where I think it was a quarter of an inch or maybe less from an artery. And if he had not been taken there, he most certainly would have, Harlem Hospital was probably very close. If it had not been for the hearts of those doctors, Martin Luther King probably would have died. I just finished doing a research project for St. Joseph's Hospital about disparities for African Americans in the healthcare system. And I thought about this as I was doing this research. If Martin Luther King had been stabbed anywhere else in the country, possibly, we know for sure, I won't say for sure, we might have lost him, because you would find it surprising. The Hippocratic Oath does not apply to everybody. You don't know what's in the hearts of men. If he had been stabbed somewhere else, he may have died. Some schools don't require you to take the Hippocratic Oath. Some hospitals or institutions, they change it. It's to change a little bit. Doesn't mean the same thing. And of course, in the Muslim community, they don't take it at all, because it has to do with God and something that they don't necessarily believe in terms of religion. So back to Dr. King's stabbing. Of course, we know that he survives that stabbing in 1959. 1961, you see the establishment of the Freedom Riders. And I'm very proud to know that I knew somebody who was a Freedom Rider. And of course, his synagogue was, half a mile from here. Rabbi Israel Dresner. We grew to be great friends when he was living, before he passed away. And he was a Freedom Rider who, along with many others, but my concern or my interest is the fact that he was so local, he was so hands-on, and he was a very strong supporter of Dr. King. And in that support, Rabbi Israel Dresner was jailed 7 times. I have never met anybody in my life who was proud to go to jail. I'm scared to go for a traffic ticket. He was proud, and he carried those times that he went to jail, he carried it as a badge of honor. So again, in 61, he was a Freedom Rider. And in 62, he continues to do, the Freedom Riders continue to do their work. And of course, you have the deaths of the 3, Schwimmer, Goodman, and there's one other one I can't think of his name. You have their disappearance and their assassination. And the Freedom Riders, all this did was embolden them, and it made them want to do more. It really wanted them to get into the mix of it. And of course, it's an iconic photograph that's hanging in the hall, in the gallery, of the bus that was burned down, that was burned down. So that's just a portion, that's not even a portion, that is just some insight about the Freedom Riders. And I've got to say that everything I talk about today is basically encapsulating the real history. There's no way I could most certainly talk about the history of Martin Luther King in an hour. 1963. April of 1963, they were having a lot of trouble in Birmingham. And Dr. King, he was there, and they wanted to do a few rallies and protests and those nonviolent, And the African American community was very reluctant. They knew if they started protesting, even if it was nonviolent, they probably would lose their jobs. And you know, they were very concerned about how you going to take care of your family if you lose your job. So what happens is a very famous incident happens, and it is called the Children's March. And they were very concerned about having the children march through the streets. But the kids, you know how kids are, you know, we kids, they enjoyed it. We had 2,000 kids from a number of high schools in Birmingham. They jumped out of windows and they just retreated and they just left the school. And the teachers knew what they were doing. One teacher, she said, I know what you guys are doing, and I'm telling you not to go. But if I turn my back and you're gone, there's nothing I can do about it. So she basically was giving her approval for them to go. So they leave school, and 2,000 children marched through the streets of Birmingham where they were hosed. They loved it. They loved it. It was almost summertime. They loved being hosed, even though it was painful. In some instances, they went to jail. They sang while they were in jail. And the sheriff, he couldn't understand what they were so happy about. But it's the children who helped Dr. King realize, because the media came and they covered it. And with that kind of media exposure, which was national, he realized that TV was really the way to go. And he really started pressing and doing more things for television, not for television, but because of the media exposure. Those children, those 2,000 children, really made a big difference in the civil rights movement. And that is just one major incident that happened during that time. And how they kept this thing together, here we go. There was a black DJ named Shelly, they call him Playboy Shelly. And Playboy Shelly Stewart. And he played the top 50s, the top 50s records, soul music and rhythm and blues. He played that. But as he was playing this music, the kids were getting a play-by-play. So they're being directed by the DJ based on the songs that were playing. Ron, you can continue to play. Based on the songs that he continued to play. Go ahead. In August of 1963, Dr. King was trying to put together, we had the Great March on Washington. And the Great March on Washington drew 250,000 people. Black, white, zebra stripe, everybody went. And in fact, my grandmother went, and she asked me, did I want to go, but what did I know? I didn't, I was a kid. The thing about being a child or a young person in the inner cities, and well, certainly Patterson, Newark, Jersey City, and the only thing we knew, if you're young, you don't know anything about civil rights unless you have been abused by the police or something has happened to you to bring you to an awareness of what is happening in the world. So my grandmother asked me to go along with my pastor, Reverend Robert Nelson Jones. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't go. And so I didn't go. But with those 250,000 people, it is said to be the greatest demonstration for freedom that has ever taken place. And I don't think to this day, outside of an inauguration, that many people came together under one banner. So many different people. During Dr. King's speech, as I got older, he's in that speech, he talks about a lot of things, but several things that stick out for me the most. He talks about his 4 little children. I had the pleasure of and I gotta say, in all due respect to Mr. Dexter King, who passed away recently, I had the pleasure of meeting Miss Colorado Scott King. I had the pleasure of meeting Miss Yolanda King. So I have met some of the King family. And so Dr. King, I lost my thought. So Dr. King, where was I? I lost my, I'm sorry, I lost my So I didn't get a chance to go down to the March on Washington. But in that speech, he talks about his 4 little children. But what else he talks about that really strikes me, and there are those who may not understand what he was talking about. In the latter parts of his speech, he talks about the fact that America has given a Negro a bad check. And what he's talking about is 40 acres and a mule. At April 12th of 1865, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And with his assassination, President Andrew Johnson comes into office. And again, he's a Southern sympathizer. And the first thing, but in the early part of his administration, what he does is he gives back the land that that Abraham Lincoln gave to the slaves. He gives it back to those the slaveholders who owned that property before. Now, in doing that, that's what Martin Luther King was talking about. For him to do that, and what took place after that, which is why African Americans are talking about reparations, because this country has never made good on that. You know, America has given a Negro a bad check, and that is just part of what reparations is about. I mentioned that Dr. King came to Patterson to 3 different locations. Now, the reason why he was coming, because he was trying to raise money for the Second March on Washington, which would have taken place on April 22nd of that same year. So this guy was really on a crusade to change things. People were listening to him. People were doing things. People wanted to work with him. Now, when Dr. King came to Patterson, there's a lot of things that were going on in Patterson that people may not be aware of. There were a lot of African American organizations that were fighting for all African American for our time. You had the NAACP. You had the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You had the Fruit of Islam. You had about, I think you had 18 African American churches. You had a number of other organizations fighting for our time. And in the will of the people, I think sometimes we get fragmented because there are too many people, too many organizations who say the same thing but don't do the same thing. So that's part of what happened in Patterson and why things are so fragmented for a while. Okay, where am I? So, 1968. Again, 1968, he comes to Patterson, and on April 4th, he goes to Memphis, Tennessee. But he's been going back and forth to Memphis for a while. But he goes to Memphis to help alleviate the stress, not just stress, but work. He's trying to get better working wages for the sanitation department, which was most certainly 99% black. And they were underpaid, and he was trying to get money for them. He was trying to get the union to have concessions to give them more money. So he goes to Memphis, and on that night before he was assassinated, he does his mountaintop speech. And I Had a Dream was 1960 was the March on Washington. The mountaintop speech was at Clayton Memorial in Memphis, and he does that speech there. And again, you can hear it if you go back, and if you can get it online now. You go back and you listen to it. You could hear it in his voice. You could hear it in his message. It was prophetic. He knew that he wasn't going to be here long. He didn't know when, but he knew that he wasn't going to be here long. Since the passing of Dr. King, we, and I'm saying we as a community of people, black and white, we have been steadily trying to unite everybody under the same banner or under the same kind of belief that all men are created equal. And that seems to be a challenge for America. That seems to be a real challenge. Why people can't seem to get it. They can't, either they don't get it or they don't care. When I look at what's going on in this country, I'm getting up there in age, but I know that I don't know what's going to happen. Now, I'm not trying to be Martin Luther King. I'm not trying to preach, and I'm not trying to give you no prophetic speech about my longevity. But it's just very scary to me how far we have gotten away from the principles of every brother. Every person is a brother. And again, I'm not preaching. I'm not going to take an offering. So if you relax, I won't be taking an offering. But in my conclusion, Mr. Foster will continue to play. In my conclusion, I realized that my job has been encouraged. My job is to encourage you to help me give you my best. And in doing that is you ask me questions, you support me by coming out. Those are the things that make what I do worthwhile. Of course, I know a lot about the history, but I like to be able to share it with everybody. And as I finish, Ron is going to take us up by playing a short medley of music that has to do with the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Movement. That's the best thing I can say. Ron, it's all yours. As Mr. Foster takes us out, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite you all to the Wayne Public Library where there's an exhibit about Dr. King's life. My gosh, each and every one of the 35 photographs and documents has a story and a life of its own. And I think this is the perfect place to have this exhibit because as you look at these photographs, the fact that you're in a library, you have the opportunity to research it and see if what I'm saying isn't the truth. Not that I would lie to you, but you have an opportunity to research the Civil Rights Movement and bring it up to date. You can research things, and I would hope that in your research and in looking at these photographs, it would suggest, I want to know more. I want to know more, and can I do more? So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your time. I'm really honored that you invited me to come and speak to you, not for you, but to you as friends. Thank you very much. Happy Black History Month. Is that black enough for you?